Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Series with Kevin, where we add value to people's lives, happening every day at 12 on ebizradio.com. Joining me for the lunchtime segment today, or the lunchtime coaching segment today, we have an entrepreneur, innovation and design thinker. She's the founder and CEO of Kuwa Urban Spaces by People, Zahra Kassam. Zahra, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Thank you for making some time to chat to us today. I know when we first had our conversation, I was like, yes, let's do this conversation. It's such a great conversation to have. But don't you want to sort of first, before we get there, tell us more about you, a little bit about your background, where you come from, what it is how you've actually established yourself in the space that you work today, and sort of preface what we're going to be talking about.
Sure, thank you. So thank you for that introduction as well. And I agree. I think when we first spoke, I was able to share a little bit of my journey, which has been quite interesting. But I think retrospectively, like anybody, when you look back, you do sort of see the red thread between all your experiences and what has got you to where you are today. And so, as you said, I am an urban planner, and I have a consulting company called Kuwa that focuses on urban planning and design. A lot of the work that the company does sort of focuses on bottom-up approaches, participatory approaches to co-creating solutions with the end users in mind. So whether this is a public space or whether this is to do with urban transport or urban agriculture, we're basically not the people who'll sit in an office and design for you, but instead get out there and sort of look at what research design really looks like. And that has actually led me to a lot of other work that I do. Apart from the Kuwa work, I do work with a lot of other entrepreneurs, a lot of research organizations, and particularly with an organization called Tethered Up, at the moment, where we're really looking at working with local innovators to craft solutions to difficult problems. And so the red thread I talk about is really looking at the processes that I was using on the ground with Kuwa, which of course, given COVID as well, has really slowed down, given also partners such as the government are also always changing, and it's very hard to sort of work with long-lasting solutions there. And this is why I've sort of used the skills that I have to also work with entrepreneurs in the startup phase, but especially in the scale-up phase now, with Tethered Up. And so that's where I am at the moment, and that's where I sort of speak from. So a lot of my own experiences, but also coming from a point where I've spoken with and worked with a lot of innovators on the ground who are doing some extraordinary things.
And on that note, I'm just as you're talking, I'm just thinking, what an amazing opportunity you have to sort of see what innovation is coming out of Africa, innovation that's coming out of entrepreneurs. I'm sure that you actually come across some mind-boggling, mind-blowing kind of conversations, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think that's what I'd really love to sort of touch upon today as well, is looking at what innovation really means is in the sort of East African and Horn of Africa context. And I think a lot of it has been romanticized, especially in this context. Of course, Kenya is a hub of social entrepreneurship and innovation, but really, what are we talking about when we talk about innovation? And a lot of the romanticizing of it has resulted in the hubs focusing on startups, on innovation as a product instead of a process. And this is where I think I also started to look the other way as to what happens after an individual has gone through the startup phase. Once they have reached their minimum viable product, they're in the market. What actually happens there? What is the story for a scale leader, as well as what is that innovation process for the scale leader as well. And I think that is something I'm super interested in. There are fewer entrepreneurs and organizations at that level. And I think hearing from a lot of them, working with a lot of them, has shown me that, as much as this might be a solution for the local context, a lot of the lessons learned coming to East Africa and the Horn of Africa are from the West. And so when we really look at what does innovation and scale up mean for Africa, it is quite a new landscape. And so what I find interesting day in and day out is working with these individuals, and trying to really understand, even in terms of management, even in terms of looking at their ecosystem, what are we actually doing with innovation?
Yeah. In terms of, you use the word romanticized. Why do you say that it has been romanticized, and what is your sort of take on that, and what is the opinion there?
Yeah, I think if we look at innovation as a process, and especially with a lot of organizations in the public sector looking at donors who are now using the word innovation as a buzzword, or human-centered design, or design thinking as a process, we automatically assume that innovation per se equals impact or change of some sort. But that's not essentially true. The work of actually innovation is the process of converting uncertainty into knowledge. And that requires a significant investment of time and effort and resources. And what that actually comes to then is, what is productive innovation, right? And so when we look at productive innovation, that's when we're looking at innovation at scale. And that's when we can look at impact. And so when I talk about romanticizing, I think a lot of people sort of have a checkbox, especially when they're reporting to donors who are interested in innovation. And they're like, yes, we are being innovative with either adding, a technology aspect, thinking that that's what innovation is, or sort of saying, yes, we are doing something new and different, but are they really solving a problem? Are they really creating impact? And so when I speak about that, I really look at innovation as a process, as a way to get towards scale that really does equal impact. And if I can go a little bit further to say a little bit more about that, I think personally, having worked with startups, the idea as a startup, as an entrepreneur, is, that story you're telling people. It's to say, yes, I've come up with a new idea. I've come up with perhaps a technology, and I'm going to help people. And that's really commendable, right? That's a really great story to tell. But when you get through the first initial phase of being a startup, when you succeed in selling your product or service, or at least creating that impact you had in mind, what happens afterwards? It pretty much goes towards business as usual. You're still going to need a great business model. You're still going to need the staff that you would have in any other business, right? You're still going to need a marketing strategy. You're still going to need to do your financial forecasting. And I think that's when the bubble sort of bursts. And a lot of Kenyan entrepreneurs that I've seen sort of stay stuck. They stay stuck in like the small impact that they've created, and they're like, we're okay. We've done what we've said we've done, and we're good with what we know. We're sort of in our comfort now. And here's where I think innovation and productive innovation needs to push a little bit more, with turning uncertainty into knowledge. So at that point where you've reached your minimum viable product, you are a startup, you've made it, here you are. What happens next? Is it just business as usual, or are we actually looking at a scale option? And what does that really mean for you? And I think a lot of turning uncertainty into knowledge also means scaling up. And that doesn't just mean like, oh, we have a great solution, let's just take it to different contexts. There is a lot that goes into scale. And I think part of that is an organization's capacity, right? And that includes the management, that includes leadership, that includes the culture, the innovation culture internally as well. And I think that's where a lot of people sort of fall through the crack. And that's what interests me, right? Like, why is it that we don't have too many scale best practices from this context? And that is the question I'm really trying to answer as well.
Yeah, I mean, everything you're saying makes so much sense. The fact that you sort of give it that wonderful description of turning uncertainty into knowledge. When it comes to innovation, I don't think people necessarily think of it that. That's innovation is great, but can you use it? Is there a point? Like, are you innovating and really creating something that actually makes a difference, that changes stuff, that informs and enables the audience you're wanting to speak to, and also it's almost challenging that process, kind of going, well, if you're innovating, that's wonderful. It's your brain is already getting there, and you're seeing the potential possibility of something. But if you're not actually solving any problems, then it's just having a great day and thinking great thoughts, really, kind of thing, right? Yeah. But I mean, in terms of the innovation, do you think one of the points you shared with us is innovation synonymous with technology? And sort of give us the idea of what the answers are around this.
Yeah. So just to go back a little bit, the turning uncertainty into knowledge is also a sort of discourse that's happening between, Stanford as the thought leaders here, and I'm seeing it a lot more out there in a lot of the publications as well. So that's not mine. That's definitely borrowed. But I definitely align with it, of course. But yeah, to go towards your question of innovation and technology, I think a lot of the sort of what we're labeling as innovation recently has been technology based, and of course that's great. I think especially in East Africa, the predictions of how many people are going to be owning smartphones in by 2030 is, I'm assuming, majority. I don't have the figures at the top of my head, but also access to internet and access to information, is synonymous with the access to a smartphone. And therefore, why not create something through technology? Because it is an assumption that technology will either save costs or save time, or create a process that is easier. And so, of course, that is where a lot of people sort of went to. So sort of looking at what are we doing, and can it be made easier and faster and cheaper through the use of technology? So, of course, that's fine. I mean, if you look at M-Pesa as an example in Kenya, it started off with a lot of the rural focus, but a lot of people like me now are dependent on it to pay our bills and everything else we're doing. It is an innovation, right?
Yeah.
But that is not the only innovation. I think, personally speaking, with the work that we've done in Kuwa, we're looking at public spaces. Public spaces is not new. It's not a technology-based solution. Smart cities might be where public spaces are involved there. But if your goal is to create public spaces that create social cohesion, that create, appreciation for socioeconomic benefits, for socio-ecological benefits, and just generally good health, there is no technology option there apart from perhaps putting Wi-Fi which would encourage people to come. But the process we used, and that's where I speak about innovation as a process rather than a product. The process was very innovative. We followed the same process that I perhaps would use with an entrepreneur when they're creating a startup. It is the same human-centered design or design thinking process that we use with scale-ups in Tethered Up as well. It's the same process we've used for creating challenge funds for big INGOs within Tethered Up's work as well. And so, and that's where I strongly feel that we need to go away from the thinking of, innovation equals technology. That's not true. We can have loads and loads of things come up from just using the process.
Yeah, it's so it's such a wonderful point of view that you're sharing with us today, because from a background where, if people don't come from this background, they very often, and it's a big assumption I make, that these things just kind of happen, like innovation planning and urban planning just kind of happens. And but when someone speaks to it the way you do, I think it really gives a nice indication around it, right? In your experiences around the urban planning, do you have some experiences you can share where there has been really amazing innovative techniques being used on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, again, with any example that I might share, we must look at the context, right? And sort of the scale of what I'm talking about. But personally, I have been able to use this process here in Kenya and around East Africa in various ways. I'll give you two examples. One was in Rwanda, where there was a center that worked with children who were on the street. And so they would bring these street kids into the center and run them through a program, hard and soft skills, to be able to give them a good foundation in life. A big part of that process was reintegration with families. And with Rwanda's history, that was quite sensitive. And Rwanda's government is also quite strong, and they have a very good strategy with what they're doing. And so this center was posed with a problem wherein they were asked to integrate families faster. They had a model where it might take 5 years to reintegrate the street kids back to their families, but the government said you need to do this in 6 months. And that was just one of the problems that were posed. They had various other problems. Yeah. And so we went in there to use the process of human-centered design to come up with solutions that would help to think about the street kids and the reintegration in a way that just didn't cut the time and say, well, here we go, this is what we can offer you in 6 months, take it or leave it, and off you go in reintegration. But really look at that impact of like sustainable reintegration. What is the best thing that can be done? Now, of course, I wasn't working alone, but I brought the process of human-centered design there. And the center actually had to reevaluate a lot of what they're doing. And they've now had to rethink their entire business model into now an early childhood development center. And so when I sort of look at how I could help there, of course, it was coupled with a lot of other things. But it was about creating a safe space for everyone who was involved in the center to be able to think outward, to be able to say, okay, well, here's our problem. Do we really understand the problem well enough? Because we tend to go into solutions really fast. As humans, we don't like to sit into the problem. And if we do, it causes discomfort, right? And so forcing them to sort of sit in the problem, understand the problem deeper. Why does this problem actually occur? And then sort of looking at what are our options for the solutions, and why should this center be the center that offers the solution? If the government is working as actively and as well as it does, if there are other centers that are doing this in 6 months, why this center? And having a question like that means that you also have to be really open to reflecting and looking inward because an answer to that question could be, you're not the right people to do this. Yeah. And where does that leave you? And so the center actually did consider exiting entirely. And I think that's really commendable, right? Because at some point, a lot of what we do is very hard to let go of. And if you can't keep doing that as a leader and as a team, you are going to get stuck. And so even though they had to do that, they had to rethink that, they had to worry about that, they had to have those hard conversations, they managed to figure out, a sort of navigate a different pathway, and they're going to be okay, hopefully. But the process of innovation that we brought in through the human-centered design was creative problem solving. And so that was one of the examples we've used as Kuwa. Another example we've used which I'll talk about, the public space one, which was in a low income neighborhood in Kenya. And it's actually where the dump site of Nairobi is. And so you can imagine putting yourself in the shoes of the residents. They, look outside of their window and they see the dump site. What does that mean for their identity, right? If you ask someone, oh, where do they live in Nairobi? And they say Dandora, the dump site of Nairobi, what does that really mean for their identity? And how they're perceived. And so when we sort of went in there as a public space perspective, a lot of what we did was say, we're going to build on what exists. So innovation doesn't necessarily mean it has to be brand new. It means that it has to be cheaper, better, faster for the end users. And so when we actually got in there, we didn't say, well, we're going to come and bring something for you. We are going to show you how to create public spaces that are the best for you. Instead, we're going to find out what you need, what do you want. Prioritization for low-income residents is not going to be public spaces, but how do you work to change mindset? And it was actually a 4-year process, but we did get to a point where, not only did the youth put down their weapons because it was a very dangerous area. We were constantly being abused by the cartels when we were in location. But it got to a point where the youth started cleaning up their areas, figured out that there were actually pristine drainage and roads and public space areas that didn't have buildings on them that were initially designed. But because of lack of, care and just cleanups, there were about like 6 inches of dirt, and these youth finally found that, and that inspired them to keep going. So we use design thinking to strategize mindset shift around the use of like recycling and of how they actually separate their waste. But I think more than anything, we ended up bringing in a technology solution, but because they asked for it. And so we had somehow left out a group of kids. So we addressed children, we addressed women, we addressed men, we addressed creatives in our participatory work. But we forgot the kids around, 10 to 14, so who are really not in like youth or children, but are there. And they were mainly interested in gaming and using technology. So we ended up bringing in Minecraft, which is a game sort of like where you can sort of create these ideal spaces. And we were able to use that to build what we're calling a floating zebra crossing, where, the participants designed that, they built that, they understood that, putting a normal zebra crossing is not going to work. Putting a guard in a gate is not the way that they want to be perceived. But what does a floating zebra crossing that reflected down using natural light, what does that mean and how does that look? And so that's one of my sort of flagship projects that I'm very proud of. But it was a mixture of technology and non-technology. But I'm proud to say the technology came at the end.
It's amazing. I listen to this and I think, wow, like the impact that it has, not only in terms of leaving a legacy, but also that you impact so many people just by doing what you do. It's phenomenal. You mentioned design thinking, so don't you want to just give us a short kind of idea of what is design thinking, and is design thinking a product?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think to me, design thinking is not a product. And design thinking, again, for those practitioners like me who use design thinking, it will understand it as a process. And this process really walks anyone through, whether you are an entrepreneur, an intrapreneur, whatever you are, a change maker of any sorts. It helps you look at the problem deeper. So the first level of it is empathizing, right? Which is really difficult, like putting yourself in the shoes of the end user and saying, right, what is actually influencing you? What is going on with you? And then it walks you through to defining what is that problem that they need solving. And the next step is ideating, so coming up with as many ideas, crazy ideas, but also feasible and usable ideas as well. And a lot of the design process then then talks about, creating a prototype, testing the prototype, iterating the prototype before launching. And I think that's the magic of design thinking as a process. It gives you the time and the safe space to try and fail and learn from your mistakes and keep trying, going back out there until you are sure that the end user needs and will use whatever you are coming up with them, of course. So it's a co-creating process. And so that is definitely not a product. That, I think, should be in everybody's sort of, entire process and system as an organization. I think it's there to help you in the beginning of a process, to design that process, to design your program or your project, but it should definitely be there as you continue to learn and come up with new products and services as well.
One of the points that are sort of standing out for me in design thinking is, as you've sort of prefaced some of the steps here, is an empathizer, really seeking out what the problem is, ideating. I think a large part of that, and also what I think a lot of people should also realize about design thinking, is part of what you need as being involved in that process. A lot of mature sort of approach to failing at the process, and really knowing that it could possibly go really badly. And being okay with that, right? Because so I think, would you agree that, people would put, a certain kind of people need to be able to do this process and be willing to step into a very scary, uncomfortable, uncertain space, right?
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And, I think failure is something we're conditioned to always avoid. And this process allows you to do it in these bite-sized movements that make you feel a bit comfortable. I have been in situations where I have, started a workshop with failure, and I've shocked everyone in that. But I think it's really important, and especially for a leader, to create that safe space to constantly think of new ideas and try them out and bring back the learnings. And this is really aligned to what we started talking about, which was turning uncertainty into knowledge, right? Given COVID, and I'll quote Scott Galloway here, who is an incredible, how do I even describe him? So he's a lecturer at the New York University of Stern School of Business. And I'd really say he's sort of like a tech pundit. And I really do listen to him a lot. And he said at the beginning of COVID that COVID is sort of the great accelerator. So meaning that any existing trends would be accelerated. And there was so much uncertainty. And if we're saying that innovation is a process of turning uncertainty into knowledge, what does that really mean for a leader? What does that really mean for an organization who has been so sure of what they're doing and is suddenly in a position where they're like, we have no idea what's going to happen in the near future or in the longer future? And so I think, as you said, failure is an important element of any process. If you can do this with comfort, if you can practice it, exercise the muscle as much as you can, the only thing that will come out of it is to benefit you from learning from it. It's not to see it as a perspective of, this is a bad thing, we must avoid it at all costs. And I think, to say that a leader then has to sort of initiate that culture, that innovative culture within that team to enable that.
And in terms of failure, if you consider the last 12 months, the last 18 months, for some countries, what are some of the learnings that you're also taking away from COVID? Because COVID in itself, specifically in the space that you're working in, affects countries and what is the better word to use here? Communities, affects communities to such a degree. And, I'm sure that this in itself is such a challenge to be able to get people to innovate and to really think in a way that sort of gets them out of the space. And yet, we, part of a complete pandemic, and the world is suffering because of it. Like, what have you noticed, and what are the learnings that you've actually taken away from all of this?
Yeah. Well, I think personally, I mean, we've all gone online. And I actually see a couple of things have come out in the year. Personally, for me, I've sort of been exposed to an exceptional leader, in my opinion. I have a lot to learn from him, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity. But I think something that specifically me, as someone who also trains and facilitates workshops on leadership, was that I forgot about the kindness of a leader. And not to take for granted that a leader speaks up about whether they are feeling vulnerable, and also trying to find out and connect with you on what is important to you at that moment, And I think I really forgot about that as someone who conducts a bunch of workshops on leadership. And I think I that touched me a lot during the pandemic, and I sort of started to look at why I'd forgotten that and what sort of conditioning caused me to be that way. So I am very grateful for that. I think the leadership was important. I think something that was also really evident during this year was, organizations like higher education institutions who all had to sort of switch to online straight away. We all know education is one of the foundations for everyone. And what does that really look like, and how did that really work? And I think sort of seeing that we actually work at Tethered Up with a university in Somalia who did that exceptionally. They went online with no qualms, no overthinking. And I think that's what the pandemic also did. As Scott says, the great accelerator. We were going towards this way. We were using a blended model at times with technology and the classroom. And so what I would love to see is a reflection from all these organizations to say, COVID came, it was an emergency. What changed? What did we have to react to? And what can we keep? And what can we continue to use those lessons in another way to keep being successful? Instead of trying to go back to what it was, we're never going to do that. So sort of reflect on that. And that's what I would really love to see companies doing in this emergency.
So, Zahra, it's been so fascinating talking to you, and I love your brain. It's like I'm so curious about it. But if you could, in summary of today's conversation, if you could leave us with some really great tips and maybe points of knowledge that people could go and research, or what could you advise people around the innovation that we spoke about, and also perhaps a design thinking in summary of everything we're saying? Like, what do you want people to know about this conversation?
Yeah, I guess I guess I'm a big believer that innovation is huge, but it's not a let's learn it in a one day kind of thing. Of course, there are loads of resources out there. IDEO.org, Acumen, a lot of people have online courses out there. I think given COVID, you've got the Stanfords and the Harvards and every university who've got some free classes online. I think there's some master classes as well. I highly recommend, I think Acumen's one, because they encourage you to work with other people in your city, even if it is online, so you're not doing it alone. And a big part of innovation is working with others. But I think if there's anything that I had to sort of share at the moment is that even if you are looking at innovation, and especially as a leader, there are a lot of sort of things to avoid when you are working in innovation. And I think the biggest one is to never get started. A lot of people just get a bit overwhelmed and say, well, we don't know where to start, and then they never start. Another pitfall is then you stop too early. Innovation is something that is continuous, especially if you want to get to scale. And then, of course, stopping too early is a problem, but stopping too late is also a problem. So when do you actually figure out that this is where we need to actually implement or get to a point of doing? And then innovating too soon is also a problem. And then there are loads of ways that in this process of getting from innovation to scale, you could fall over. And so even though I think it should be there for everyone to use, I don't think anyone should take it for granted how intense the process is. And so invest your time, invest your team in a continuous learning sort of culture with innovation.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Zahra, that's Zahra Kassam. She's entrepreneur, innovation, design thinker, and founder of CEO Kuwa, Urban Spaces by People. Zahra, if we have to get hold of you, what is the quickest way? Because I'm sure, you know, people are listening today and they're going to go, okay, cool. We need to, who's this woman and where can we find her?
So I'm open to anyone who would like to get in touch with me. I think my LinkedIn is quite open if you'd like to reach me on LinkedIn. I am happy to also get any sort of emails and respond to them and then take the conversation into a little bit more of a direct form. Would you like me to share my email here?
Yeah. Go right in.
So it's Zahra, so ZAHRAF, Kassam, KASSAM, @gmail.com.
There we go. Guys, and all this information, the links and all of it will be in the description boxes below. Zahra Kassam, thank you for chatting to me today, and thanks for joining us for the Lunchtime Coaching segment.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful day and chat to you soon.
Thank you. Bye.